I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. We have a great show in store for you tonight. More political candidates are stepping forward in Oregon statewide races. One is stepping out of a local race. Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler not going to run for re-election. Also tonight, money for homeless programs continues to pour into Multnomah County, where the latest millions of dollars are from, and falls a time when some folks like to travel. This year, that includes a local group of elected leaders who will head to Portugal in an apparent attempt to pump new life into Measure 110. And that is our big story tonight. Measure 110, which decriminalized user amounts of pretty much every street drug you've ever heard of in Oregon, passed back in 2020 with 58% of the vote. These days, though, not so popular. Apparently, open drug markets and addicts shooting up in the streets of Portland and other places in our state, not to mention record overdose deaths, has changed the public's mind a little bit. An April 2023 survey by Portland-based DHM Research found most people polled felt Measure 110 made things worse. That's what the orange bar is showing you there. They felt it made things worse in terms of drug addiction and overdose, homelessness, and crime. The poll was an online poll of 500 Oregon voters. That same poll found that 63% of voters support bringing back criminal penalties for drug possession, but continuing to use the marijuana money that's diverted for 110 to pay for treatment programs. And a more recent poll by the respected Emerson College found that 56% of voters now think Measure 110 should be completely repealed, wiped off the books. 45% said, nah, leave it alone. The poll was done in late August and was paid for by a group that opposes decriminalizing drugs. So it does seem clear from the surveys that sentiment has shifted. And calls for a ballot measure to repeal it are in part or completely getting louder. So repeal it in part or repeal it completely, getting louder. Faced with that, the folks who organized support for the law in the first place, they've apparently decided it would be good for local politicians to take a field trip to see how great things can be if Measure 110 is just given the time. So they are going to Portugal. Yep, October 30th through November 3rd, according to the Oregonian newspaper. Now, in case you don't know, Portugal was the first country in the world to decriminalize user amounts of street drugs, and Oregon Health and Justice Recovery Alliance is a coalition of state and national groups who are organizing the trip. A spokeswoman told the newspaper that the trip will be paid for by private foundations whose missions and work focus on criminal justice reform. So who's going? Well, these people. Multnomah County Chair Jessica Vega Peterson, who said she's going to pay for the trip herself. Multnomah County District Attorney Mike Schmidt, State Representative Rob Noce, State Senator Floyd Prozansky, State Senator Kate Lieber, all Democrats, and State Rep Lily Morgan, who's a Republican. And according to the paper, about 10 others are going to go as well. I mean, why not? Who doesn't love a trip to Portugal in October? But here's the thing. We could have saved them all a lot of time and money. We already spoke to the guy that they're going to meet with. In fact, we've had him on our show twice. Last October, Dr. João Goal talked with me about his country's decriminalization. Portugal allowed 10 days worth of personal use of drugs starting back in the year 2000. Oregon's 110 is made after Portugal, modeled is what I was trying to say. Now, at the time, he told me that it's been a resounding success, but 9 months later, he was at Georgetown Law School in D.C., admitting the program having some trouble.
It is true that we are having some difficulties nowadays in supplying timely treatment without waiting lists, for instance. We have a visibility of disorganized users on the streets in Lisbon and in Porto, mostly in the big cities. And we are concerned about it.
So there you go. You're welcome. Everybody can just stay home. That's what's happening there. I guess they're probably still going to go. They'll hear Dr. Goal say that the problem is the country stopped funding treatment centers. When Portugal's decriminalization began, they could offer drug users treatment immediately, no waiting. But over time, he said the country stopped investing in treatment, and eventually there's now a long line, a long wait for help. And so addicts just don't go. And the cops have stopped citing people for drug use in public because, well, there's no consequences. Sound familiar? It'll be interesting to see what our local politicians bring back from their fact-finding trip. And here, by the way, is my opinion on this. I'm one of many who voted for Measure 110, and it's time for a change. It should be at least modified and maybe repealed, in my opinion. It seems to me this Portugal trip is a Hail Mary pass, if you will, a last-second chance by the folks who pushed Measure 110 to now save it. They're hoping the local politicians soak up enough success stories that they can come back home and evangelize to all of us about how incredible the power of decriminalization is, and somehow magically make all the despair that we see on our streets disappear. I got to tell you, I'm not buying it, and I don't think you should either. We gave this a try. The results? A disaster, a humanitarian tragedy. The Oregon Health Authority reports that nearly 1,300 people died from drug overdoses in Oregon last year. 1,300, that's roughly 3.5 people every day, all year long. It's not humane to let people chasing a high kill themselves on our streets as part of some well-intended social experiment. I hope the politicians who visit Portugal will look hard at the reality that is there now in the streets and ask themselves if that's really the future we want. Then again, they could also just hang out in downtown Portland and ask themselves how long they'll allow our current mess to go on. That's my opinion anyway. You don't have to agree with me, and the great thing is, a lot of times, a lot of you don't. Hey, that's fine. But you should communicate. Send us an email with your thoughts, will you? The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. We may use your reply on our show tomorrow. It'll help all of us think more deeply about this issue. Now, when it comes to the homeless crisis, we talk a lot about the problems, but one thing you don't hear all that much about is that there's no money. In fact, there is so much money that Multnomah County doesn't know what to do with it all. And it keeps coming in by the tens of millions. Now, that probably doesn't make those of you who pay the special tax all that happy, but it is a fascinating problem, I think. And tonight, our Blair Best is diving into the details to help you understand where the latest bundles of money are coming from and what some commissioners want to do with it.
For people like Vern, homelessness means learning to hide.
You got to find somewhere that's kind of secluded, but there's not many places.
His latest spot, under the Morrison Bridge. But it didn't last long. On Wednesday, Rapid Response removed his camp.
They just showed up and said, we got to move.
And he knows life is about to get harder. As he's bracing for the daytime ban on camping, the city is expected to enforce sometime this fall.
During the day, you'd have to take everything you have. And that's pretty much impossible.
He says there needs to be a safe place for him to go and store his things. It's exactly the type of place Multnomah County commissioners say they're trying to fund, using unspent county money that's meant for homeless services. Now, the reason for these problems out on the streets isn't because of a lack of money. For months, Multnomah County has been sitting on millions of dollars meant for homeless services. They figured out how to spend some of that last week, but now they have an additional $62 million they have yet to spend.
We have so much money. I mean, it really is shocking.
Last week, county commissioners voted to spend $17 million unspent dollars on expanding shelter and cleaning up Portland streets, among other things. This week, they learned of even more money coming their way.
We should have been forewarned that this was probably going to occur. So it just creates confusion and disarray.
In total, Multnomah County has more than $100 million unspent dollars meant for homeless services. And the money is really stacking up. It started with $58 million that they already had but was not spent. Then the county learned they'd get another $50 million because the homeless tax brought in a lot more money than expected. And on Monday, county commissioners learned of an additional $12 million coming from the federal government. All told, $120 million. Commissioners have only decided where that $17 million will go. The rest is still up for grabs. And the focus this week is on how to spend about $62 million of all this. Commissioner Sharon Myron is proposing they spend it on 3 things: shelter beds, a downtown Portland sobering center, and places for people to go after leaving detox or treatment.
we should be investing in those big picture things we know we need. And that's what I'll be advocating for.
Commissioner Julia Brim Edwards has a similar proposal.
If we invest in shelter, make a big investment in shelters now, I believe we decrease the need for and the amount of unsanctioned camping that's having a huge impact on our neighborhoods.
And on people like Vern, who's lost in what he calls a broken system, with nowhere to hide.
So you're kind of stuck in a way.
Now, county commissioners are meeting on Thursday to talk about how they're going to spend all this money, and they'll vote on it next week.
And you told me earlier they're getting a consultant's report, right, on the Joint Office of Homeless Services, how it's operating, how they're spending their money?
Yes, and that report, Pat, is actually coming out the day after the county is voting on how to spend these millions of dollars.
Why would they vote before the report? They've already paid the consultant. See what the report says.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. So today I talked with Commissioner Myron, and she is saying that they should hold off on this vote, that they should wait, see what the report says before investing millions of dollars into homelessness.
Well, we've talked with Sharon Myron quite a bit. I was getting caught up in whether I would call her Commissioner Myron, but she is really tough on this, and I totally agree with her on this point. Why would you spend all that money, have a consultant do the entire report, vote the money first, then see what the report is? It's just backwards. Wait, you've already waited this long. Wait another week or so.
Right, and she's talked about this whole process, or in her eyes, being backwards for quite some time now. I think you even did an interview with her where she said there's no plan.
Yeah.
The county has no plan on homelessness. And I asked her about that. I said, what are you guys doing to come up with a plan? And she said she's proposed a plan numerous times to the chair, but the way it's set up, it's up to the chair to sort of take the lead on that.
We'll be watching this one closely. Thank you, Blair Best. Good stuff as always. Still to come on the story. We told you the political campaigns for 2024 would heat up this week, and boy, did they ever. Last night, we told you about Senator Elizabeth Steiner running for state treasurer. Today, two men threw their hats into the ring for Secretary of State, with one of them hoping to make history. And what about the current Secretary of State who was appointed after Shemia Fagan resigned? Will she run? All the details when the story returns. On last night's show, we were the first news outlet to break the news that Senator Elizabeth Steiner is running to become Oregon's first ever female treasurer in 2024. Tomorrow is when the window to file for Oregon's statewide political positions opens up, so the campaign announcements are underway and they're coming in hot and furious. Today we learned two candidates who are vying to become Oregon's next Secretary of State. They are current Oregon Treasurer Tobias Reed and State Senator James Manning, who represents parts of the Eugene area. Let's start with the Democrat Tobias Reed. He got his start in state politics in 2007, serving as a state rep in the Beaverton area. He held that job until he was elected state treasurer in 2016 and then re-elected in 2020. But he cannot run for a third term as treasurer, and so now he set his sights on the number 2 job in Oregon government. In his campaign announcement, Reed wrote, "I'm running for Secretary of State to restore trust and accountability in this important office. I'll make sure Oregon continues to lead the nation in secure and accessible voting." Now to State Senator James Manning. He's hoping to make history as the first person of color to be Oregon Secretary of State. He served in the U.S. Army for 23 years and then got involved in state politics in 2016, elected as the senator representing Eugene, Elmira, and Veneta. In his announcement today, Manning wrote, "Our next Secretary of State will be central to defending our democracy and building public trust in the work of the office. I have dedicated my life to serving the public, and it would be a great honor to serve as our next Secretary of State." But what about the current Secretary of State, Lavon Griffin-Valade? Will she run next year to keep that job that she was appointed to after Shemia Fagan's disaster? No, she will not. Following her swearing in earlier this summer, she said, "I have no intention of running for the job when it's on the ballot next year. I have no political career to consider, no donors to appease, and no agenda beyond the genuine desire to run this agency with integrity. Over the next 18 months, I'll make decisions based on what the rules say and what is the best interest of Oregonians. And then I'll walk away." Good for you. Coming up next on The Story, we're talking about two very different topics: white-collar crime and the great outdoors. First, 3 former executives for a Lake Oswego-based company recently learned their fate in federal court, all because of a $300 million fraud scheme. How long they'll be spending behind bars, and a quote from the federal agent that you're sure to appreciate. And then wildlife experts in the state of Washington are perplexed by the deaths of little creatures along the Olympic Peninsula.
Pretty skinny, pretty emaciated, and their skins are basically cooked onto them.
We'll take you along with a researcher and show you the kind of work they're doing out in the field to try to determine what's going on and how it could affect other wildlife. That's coming up when The Story returns.
Okay.
Welcome back. Tonight, we're going to close the book on what's been called the largest white-collar criminal case in Oregon history. 3 former executives of Lake Oswego-based Equitas Capital Management recently learned their fate in federal court, and they're going to prison for a long time. Before we get to their sentences, you may be asking, why should I care? Well, because at its peak, the company these 3 men were running had $1 billion in assets and employed 150 people. How did things come crumbling down? Well, through a $300 million fraud conspiracy and years of work by federal agents. Regulators and federal prosecutors say Equitas began operating in a Ponzi-like fashion, saying executives misled investors about how their money was being used. Instead of what they said it was being used for, it was actually paying past investors and company operating costs. Yeah, that's not legal. Here's a look at how long each of the men will spend behind bars, along with the fines that they have to pay. Former Equitas Chief Executive Robert Jesnick got 14 years and $1.5 million in fines. Chief Compliance Officer Andrew McRitchie got 5 years and 10 months, along with nearly $690,000 in fines. And former Executive Vice President Brian Rice got 3 years and 1 month, paired with just over $116,000 in fines. As far as restitution is concerned, that'll be calculated at a later hearing. Each will report to prison in November, and each also got 3 years of supervised release after they're out. We think this quote from a former IRS agent in Seattle sums up the case pretty well. Strictly speaking, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul is not illegal. However, lying to Peter for personal financial gain and then not paying Paul, definitely criminal. But how do the sentences of those 3 men compare to other high-profile white-collar crimes around Oregon? Well, we don't have the time to go through all of them, but our friends at the Portland Business Journal already did the hard work for us. You can head to their website to check out the article from cases involving Nike, Adidas, Intel, even a vacuum cleaner distributor. The team at the Business Journal has it all right there for you. Just head over to bizjournal.com/Portland. Now, I should warn you that some of the stories are behind a paywall, but you know, subscribing is always an option. I want to tell you about a new segment you just saw the intro to. It's going to be called Environment Northwest, and I think you're really going to like it. It's a partnership between several TV stations here in the Pacific Northwest as we report on climate-related issues. And tonight, we're heading north and west to the Olympic Peninsula, where there's a common animal being found dead in really large numbers. And researchers are working to figure out why and what it means for other wildlife. We're focusing on a creature that does not get a lot of attention, the rough-skinned newt. Erica Zucco shows us the work being done to solve the mystery of why they're dying off.
At a remote alpine lake in the South Olympic Mountains.
This is a relatively natural lake that you might see kind of anywhere in the Cascades or Olympics in Washington. This is a nice garter snake.
Home to abundant wildlife and an active ecosystem.
Our other highly toxic critter in this area is
Max Lambert is on a mission. The research scientist for Washington Fish and Wildlife was out on a hike when a mystery first surfaced.
It's not right to find a bunch of amphibians dying off.
He spotted dead rough-skinned newts with no clear cause of death and some live ones that had red markings on their throats.
Sores on his chin. Probably an infection.
Now a study is underway to find out why.
So get dirty.
We hiked in with Lambert in late summer. The lake had shrunk, leaving thick mud behind.
I told you glorping, didn't I?
In search of newts and answers.
What might be causing the animals to die in these large numbers for multiple years in a row? Our first dead newts up here.
The first disturbing discovery came just minutes in, emaciated and bloated.
I've never seen one that's actually like this swollen like this. Typically they're like all completely just totally desiccated.
In the dried earth near the lake, several had washed up.
Not a single live newt yet.
He saved a few dead specimens for study before an adjoining pond revealed some still alive.
A little pool here, we got about 6 newts.
Several looked healthy.
Skinny, but okay.
Others were more lethargic than normal. This part of the search also revealed more clues, as we found dragonfly and damselfly larvae in the water.
They aren't starving to death because there's no food available.
So was there another reason some weren't eating? Lambert gathered the newts, recording the condition of the dead ones.
Pretty skinny, pretty emaciated, and their skins are basically cooked onto them.
And going further as he assessed the live ones.
You can see all these rough glands along its back and tail.
He recorded length, weight, and the characteristics that could show signs of what's going wrong.
These are rough skin newt here on its throat. We see these 2 or 3 big defects, we call them. Probably an infection of some sort going on there. Oh, okay.
He swabbed their stomachs and between their toes to test for the kind of pathogens and bacteria hikers or animals could have tracked in.
It could also be a pathogen that's been here for 100 years and has been totally fine for all that time frame, and then climate change has triggered it to become a little more prevalent or impactful to the animals.
He sampled water pH and temperature as they search for potential causes. Whether pollution, climate impacts, or something else entirely are to blame, Lambert says cracking this case is about more than this common species.
Everything's connected. These are good pulse on the environment for things like climate change, for things like new pathogens. They help us keep our ecosystems healthy.
As for the newts themselves,
all right, friends, time to go home. Thank you for your contribution.
He released them after sampling with hopes that the healthy ones will make it through a full life cycle and prepared for the next step of the journey to find answers.
Yeah, I hope they figure that out. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember the story, our collective story? Well, that never ends. The good stuff's coming your way next. And in the meantime, I'll see you right back here tomorrow night.